Hello, I'm Dr. Brandon Briggs. I'm one of the primary investigators of the Interactions Project, and I am currently standing on Lake Frixel. Right behind me is the Canada Glacier.
A large theme in science is the stability versus change. How does the environment, how stable it is, versus when does it actually start to change, and how that can actually affect the biology. Now, this Taylor Valley is great for answering those types of questions. There's a lot of historical change that's actually happened in these particular areas. This was once connected to the ocean with the McMurdo Sound not far away. And there was a large lake that came in here that was full of salt water. After some point of time, this started to get even drier, and so the lake started to dry up. This left a lot of salt that was still within the lake waters, and it started to stratify, where we would have deep waters that had a lot of salt in it, and then some top water that had less salt in there. And after some point in time, it got a little bit colder, and then we started getting an ice coverage over the top of these lakes. Now, for the last 1,000 years or so, it's been like this, where these lakes have been stable without much change happening, where you have these ice covers that are protecting the salt water that's below it.
But now that we have global warming and temperatures starting to rise, these glaciers behind me are starting to recede back. They're actually dumping more fresh water into these lakes. And if you look down along the moats out of these lakes, they're actually starting to melt out even more than previously. So we're getting these changes that are starting to happen because of this warming. And this is going to fundamentally change how these lakes actually interact with each other. And it's the microbes. This is one of the few areas on the earth where it's dominant by just microbial communities. There's really nothing larger than a microbe that's living in these areas. So what we're trying to do is actually understand how these changes, how this fresh water is coming in, how this ice is starting to recede, how that's going to affect these microbial communities, and what's actually going to happen in the future from that.
When we go up to Lake Bonny with Blood Falls, that's actually starting to dump in more this iron-rich brine or salt into the bottom layers of Lake Bonny.
So, along with my science team, which is focused on the lakes and the microbes that live in the lakes, there are other teams that are part of the long-term ecological research project. So there are teams that study the soils, there are teams that study the glaciers and the streams that flow from the glaciers into the lakes, and probably some other parts of this ecosystem that I'm forgetting right now. And we study the ecosystem long term so that we can compare from year to year whether there are a lot of changes. So if we just took a snapshot of data from 1 year, we would not be able to know whether it was a warm year or a cold year or a heavy snow year or not. But with 30 years of data collected year after year, we can monitor the changes in the ecosystem over time.
This is one of the things that we need to understand for the entire planet Earth, right? Is it stable or is it changing? Are there certain places that are more stable than others? And how does that affect the biology? How does that affect us? How does it affect our crops? And this is something that we need to be able to understand to be able to predict what we need to do in the future.